Snow was falling in slow silence over the mountains that morning. The forest stood still, wrapped in white mist. A lone man made his way through the frozen woods carrying an old axe on his shoulder and a bundle of firewood on his back. His name was Elias Boone, a quiet lumberjack who had lived most of his life near the northern ridges. He was tall, strong, and gentle at heart. The snow had begun before dawn, and by noon it had turned into a blizzard. Elias could hardly see the path. The wind howled through the pines and pushed the snow sideways like smoke. He had to find shelter soon before the storm buried everything. He looked around for a cabin or a rock ledge but found none. The cold began to sting his hands and he could feel his breath freezing in the air. His boots sank deep into the snow with every step. When the sky grew darker and the wind sharper, he finally saw a shadow among the cliffs, a dark opening hidden behind a curtain of pine trees. It looked like the mouth of a cave. He hesitated for a moment. Caves in the mountains could be dangerous, filled with wild animals or sharp rocks, but he had no other choice. He pushed through the snow and stepped closer. The wind seemed to soften near the entrance. The air there was still and heavy with the scent of smoke. Smoke, he thought. Someone must have been here before. Elias stepped inside carefully, holding a small lantern he kept in his coat. The dim flame flickered against the walls of the cave. It was wide enough for him to stand upright, and the ground was dry, though the air carried the smell of burnt wood. He noticed something strange in a small fire pit made of stones, ashes still warm. His eyes moved around slowly. There was a rough blanket made from woven cloth, a clay pot, and the faint outline of footprints near the far wall. He realized then that he was not the first to take shelter here. He whispered to himself, "Maybe a traveler." His voice echoed faintly. He set down his axe and the firewood near the wall and crouched near the ashes. They were still hot to the touch. Someone had built this fire only a short while ago. As he leaned closer, he heard a soft rustle behind him. His heart jumped. He turned sharply, raising the lantern. A figure stood in the shadows, small, wrapped in a worn brown shawl. Her dark hair fell over her shoulders, and her eyes, sharp and calm, stared back at him. For a moment neither spoke. The only sound was the faint crackle of the lantern flame. Then in a low voice she said, "This cave is not empty." Elias straightened, unsure what to say. He could see that she was not a threat. Her clothes were simple but handmade, stitched with patterns he did not recognize. Her face was proud, her expression cautious. She looked like she had lived here for a long time. "I'm sorry," Elias said, his voice gentle. "I didn't know. The storm is bad outside. I only came to get warm." The woman nodded slightly but didn't step closer. "You can stay near the fire," she said quietly, "but don't disturb anything." She turned away and moved to the far side of the cave where a small pile of belongings lay, a bundle of herbs, a wooden bowl, a folded blanket. Elias felt awkward, like he had entered someone's home without knocking. He set his lantern on the ground and carefully rebuilt the fire using the wood he had brought. Soon the flames rose again, painting the stone walls in orange light. The warmth filled the air, chasing away the biting cold. For a while they sat in silence. Elias glanced at the woman from time to time. She seemed calm yet distant, her eyes watching the fire as if it were something sacred. He thought she might be a wanderer, but her presence felt rooted, as if the mountain itself accepted her. Finally he spoke. "I'm Elias. I live down the valley. I didn't mean to intrude." She looked at him then, her eyes deep and unreadable. "I am Nita," she said softly. "I live here because the world outside took everything from me." Her words carried quiet sorrow. Elias did not ask more. He felt the weight of her tone and chose to respect her silence. The storm roared outside, but inside the cave time seemed to slow. The fire cast a soft light on the rocky walls. Nita moved gracefully as she poured water from a small clay jar into the pot, adding dried leaves. The smell of herbs filled the air, warm, earthy, and strange. She offered him a wooden cup of the steaming drink. "It will help with the cold," she said. Elias accepted it with gratitude. The tea had a sharp, bitter taste, but soon brought warmth to his chest. He felt his fingers stop trembling. "You know these woods well?" he asked gently. She nodded. "My people lived here before the railroad came," she said, her eyes far away. "The mountain was ours. My husband hunted here. When the war came, many of us were forced to leave. I stayed." Elias listened quietly, not wanting to interrupt. He knew the stories. Settlers moving west, land taken, promises broken. Yet sitting before him was a living memory of that history, not words in a book, but a person who had carried it through the years. As the night deepened, the cave grew warmer. The wind outside howled like a living thing, but inside the fire gave a soft rhythm of comfort. Elias shared a few of his own stories. About working in the forest, about losing his brother in an accident long ago, about how the woods were the only place that felt like home. Nita listened without comment, her expression calm, her eyes thoughtful. When he finished, she said, "You carry your pain quietly." The trees hear it, her words surprised him. No one had ever said something like that before. There was truth in her voice, something that made him feel seen. He smiled faintly. "Maybe they do," he said. "Maybe that's why I keep cutting them down, so they won't whisper back." She didn't smile but looked at him with a strange sadness, as though she understood something deeper. Hours passed. The fire burned lower and the storm began to fade outside. Elias stretched his hands toward the warmth. He noticed Nita had closed her eyes, her head bowed slightly as if she were listening to something beyond the cave walls. He didn't disturb her. Instead, he leaned back against the stone and felt the peace of the moment settle around them. The forest outside still raged, but inside was calm. Two strangers sharing a fragile space of warmth and silence. Before he drifted toward sleep, he glanced again at Nita. She sat upright, her face lit by the dying glow of the fire. There was a strength in her stillness, a sense of belonging that made the cave feel less like a hiding place and more like a home, carved by patience and loss. Elias realized that maybe he had not found this cave by accident. Maybe on that cold mountain something, or someone, had guided him here. The last sound he heard before sleep was the soft crackle of the fire and Nita's quiet voice speaking words in her native tongue, like a prayer carried into the night. Outside, the snow fell gently, covering the tracks that had led him here as if the mountain wished to keep it secret. When Elias woke up, the storm had already stopped. The cave was dim, the fire now only glowing embers. For a moment he didn't remember where he was. Then the cold air touched his face and the smell of herbs brought the memories back. He slowly sat up, hearing a faint sound of water dripping somewhere deep inside the cave. His back ached from sleeping against the stone wall, but the warmth that still lingered made him feel strangely safe. Nita was gone. Her blanket was folded neatly near the corner. Elias looked around a little uneasy. The cave felt empty without her quiet presence. He stood up and walked toward the entrance. Outside, the world was white. Endless snow covering the trees, the rocks, and the frozen stream below. The storm had left the forest in silence again. The sun peeked through gray clouds, throwing soft light on the mountainside. It was beautiful, but also lonely. He stepped outside carefully, breathing in the cold morning air. His boots sank deep into the snow. He could see small footprints leading away from the cave. Light, careful steps that disappeared into the forest. He guessed they were Nita's. She must have gone to gather something. Elias went back inside and added wood to the fire. As the flames rose again, he felt grateful. He didn't want to leave yet. Something about this cave and its quiet inhabitant made him curious. A short while later, he heard soft footsteps approaching. Nita appeared at the cave's mouth, carrying a small bundle of sticks and a basket woven from dried grass. Snow dusted her shawl and hair. She looked surprised to see him still there. "You stayed," she said quietly, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. "Yes," Elias replied, smiling gently. "Didn't think it right to leave without saying thank you." She gave a small nod and came inside. From her basket, she took some roots, herbs, and dried berries. Elias watched as she set them near the fire and began preparing something in the clay pot. Her movements were calm and graceful, like someone who had done the same thing for many years. The smell that filled the cave was pleasant, warm and earthy with a hint of sweetness. Elias's stomach rumbled and she noticed. "You are hungry," she said. "This will help," he chuckled softly. "You read me well, ma'am." She didn't respond to that but offered him a small smile. When the stew was ready, she handed him a wooden bowl. The taste was simple but comforting, like the forest itself, wild but alive. "This is good," he said after a few bites. "Better than anything I've eaten in weeks." She looked at him for a moment and said quietly, "It is the mountain that feeds us, not me." They ate in silence for a while. Elias wanted to ask about her life, about how she had come to live alone in such a place, but something in her calmness stopped him. He felt that she would share when she was ready. After finishing his meal, he helped her gather the leftover ashes and clear the space near the fire. She didn't stop him this time. Maybe she had begun to trust him, at least a little. Later, as the day went on, the wind outside picked up again, but not as harshly as before. Elias decided to check the forest edge to see if the path home was open. Nita watched him quietly. "Be careful," she said softly. "The snow hides the ground. You could lose your way." He nodded and went out, following the narrow trail down the slope. The world outside was dazzling white, the sunlight reflecting off every frozen surface. He walked only a short distance before he saw something unusual. A small wooden carving hanging from a pine branch, tied with a strip of leather. It looked like a bird, simple but beautifully shaped. He took it down gently, brushing the snow off. The carving seemed old. Maybe Nita made it, he thought. He turned back toward the cave, feeling a quiet pull in his chest. When he returned, Nita was sitting by the fire again, mending a piece of cloth with thin thread. Elias showed her the carving. "I found this hanging outside," he said. "It yours?" Her hands paused for a second and her eyes softened. "Yes," she said. "It keeps the spirits away. My husband carved it long ago." Elias lowered his head respectfully. "He must have been a good man." She nodded slowly. "He was brave and kind, but he is gone now." There was no bitterness in her voice, only peace, like she had learned to live with her sorrow. Elias placed the carving carefully near her blanket. "Then it should stay close to you," he said. For the first time she smiled, a true, gentle smile that reached her eyes. As the day passed, the two of them began to talk more. Nita told him small things about her life, how she gathered herbs, how she used them to heal, how she listened to the mountain for guidance. Elias told her about his work as a lumberjack, how he spent months alone in the forest cutting trees for the logging company, and how sometimes he talked to the trees as if they could hear him. She didn't laugh at that. "They do hear," she said simply. "Everything here listens," her words stayed in his mind. The cave felt alive with quiet wisdom. When the light began to fade, they sat close to the fire again. Elias asked softly, "You ever think about leaving? Maybe coming down to the town?" Nita shook her head. "I have no place there. The world below moves too fast. Up here the mountain remembers me. Down there no one would." Elias understood more than he said. He too had felt like a stranger in towns, surrounded by noise and faces that never looked twice. Here, in this quiet cave, he felt more at peace than he had in years. That night the wind returned, softer now but steady. The cave walls hummed faintly, and the firelight danced on the stone. Elias lay near the wall, staring at the flickering ceiling. Nita sat across from him, humming a low tune. It was a song without words, gentle as the falling snow. He closed his eyes and listened. The melody made him think of home, of his mother's voice long ago, of everything he had lost but still carried inside. He didn't say anything. The song was enough. Sometime after midnight, a strange sound came from deeper in the cave, a faint echo, like a whisper of wind moving through a narrow tunnel. Elias sat up, listening. Nita turned her head slightly, calm. "It is the inner path," she said softly. "The mountain breathes there." He looked toward the darkness beyond the firelight but couldn't see anything. "You mean there's more to this cave?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, but it is not for everyone. It remembers things. Sometimes it shows what must be seen." Her words sent a small shiver through him, not of fear but of wonder. He wanted to ask more, but she had already closed her eyes again. The fire crackled softly between them, and outside the snow fell again, gentle, endless, and bright under the moonlight. Elias lay back down, thinking of everything he had seen in the last 2 days. He had come here just to escape a storm, but something deeper had found him instead, something that felt like fate. He didn't know what the mountain wanted to show him, or why he felt drawn to this place, but he knew one thing. He wasn't ready to leave yet. He turned to look at Nita one last time before sleep. Her face was peaceful, the firelight tracing the quiet strength in her features. The cave around them felt alive, humming softly like a heart that had seen centuries pass. The snow outside covered the forest again, sealing them off from the world below. And in that silence, Elias Boone, the lonely lumberjack, began to feel that his journey had only just begun. Morning light crept slowly into the cave, turning the gray stones into soft shades of gold. Elias opened his eyes to see Nita already awake, sitting near the fire. She was grinding dried herbs in a small stone bowl, her movements quiet and steady. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the mountain covered in bright snow that sparkled under the rising sun. The air was cold but peaceful. Elias stretched his arms and rubbed his eyes. He had slept more deeply than he had in months. The warmth of the fire and the calm rhythm of the night had given him rest he didn't know he needed. He sat up and looked at Nita. "You never sleep much, do you?" he asked softly. She shook her head with a faint smile. "Sleep is for those who have no memories chasing them," she said, her voice calm but thoughtful. "The mountain keeps me awake." Elias didn't quite understand, but he could feel that her words carried truth. He got to his feet and stepped toward the cave entrance. The sun was bright enough now to make him squint. The forest below was shining with untouched snow, every tree branch heavy with white. For a moment everything seemed unreal, like a world made of glass and silence. When he returned inside, Nita had already placed a pot over the fire. The smell of boiled herbs and berries filled the air again. She handed him a bowl and he thanked her. They sat side by side, eating quietly, listening to the distant sound of melting snow dripping from the rocks above the cave. After a while, Elias asked the question that had stayed in his mind all night. "You said there's another part of this cave," he began carefully. "You called it the inner path." "What did you mean?" Nita looked at him, her eyes calm but serious. "The mountain holds memories," she said slowly. "Long before your people came, my ancestors used to come here. They said the cave was a bridge between the living and the remembered. The deeper you go, the more you see, not with your eyes, but with your spirit." Elias frowned softly, unsure what to think. "You mean visions?" "Not dreams," she said. "Truths that the earth keeps when people forget." He looked toward the dark end of the cave. He hadn't gone far in that direction because the air there had felt heavy, colder somehow. "Have you been there?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Once, a long time ago. I went when I lost my husband. I wanted to understand why the world takes what we love. I found no answer, but I came back with peace." Her words made him silent for a while. The way she said them carried something powerful under not sorrow, but acceptance. Elias stared into the fire, thinking about his own losses, about the brother he'd lost to a falling tree, about how he had never been able to forgive himself. Maybe this place could help him too. He finally spoke again. "Would you take me there?" he asked quietly. Nita looked into the flames for a long time before answering. "If the mountain calls you, you will know," she said. "You cannot go because you want to. You must go because you need to." The rest of the day passed in quiet rhythm. They gathered wood, melted snow for water, and repaired a crack in the clay pot. Elias helped Nita carry stones to strengthen the small wall she had built near the entrance to block the cold wind. She worked with patience, guiding his hands when he didn't know how. Every movement she made seemed connected to the land itself, like she understood how everything fit together. As evening approached, Elias sat near the cave's mouth and watched the sunset. The sky burned with gold and pink light, the snow glowing in soft colors. He felt small but peaceful, a feeling he hadn't known since childhood. Behind him, Nita hummed her soft tune again. It drifted through the cave, blending with the wind outside. When night came, Elias lay awake, staring at the flickering shadows. Something about the cave's depth kept pulling at him. He could feel it, a quiet heartbeat coming from the dark tunnel beyond the firelight. He sat up, unable to resist. The silence was deep, yet he felt as if something was waiting there, patient and alive. Nita opened her eyes as if she sensed his thoughts. "The mountain calls," she said softly. "You hear it now." Elias hesitated, unsure. "Is it safe?" She nodded once. "It will not harm you if your heart is honest." He stood up slowly, taking the lantern from near the fire. Nita rose too, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. Without another word, she walked beside him toward the back of the cave. The tunnel there was narrow, the air cool and still. The walls shimmered faintly as the lantern's light touched them, showing veins of quartz and crystal. Their footsteps echoed softly. After a short distance, the path widened into a small chamber. The air was colder here, but clear, and in the center stood a pool of water, perfectly still, like a mirror. The reflection of the lantern danced on its surface. Elias stepped closer, his breath misting in the cold. "It's beautiful," he whispered. Nita knelt near the edge and touched the surface lightly with her fingertips. "This is the heart of the mountain," she said. "It shows what must be seen, but you must not force it. You look into it only when it looks back at you." Elias stared into the water. At first he saw only his own reflection. Tired eyes, rough face, the marks of long years in the forest. Then slowly the image began to change. The ripples widened and shadows appeared. Trees falling, a loud crack, his brother's face shouting something he couldn't hear. Then silence. Elias stepped back, breathing hard. Nita stood beside him, calm. "Do not fear," she said softly. "The mountain shows only truth, not punishment." He tried to steady himself. "It's showing me what I tried to forget," he said, voice trembling slightly. She nodded. "Sometimes forgetting is the heaviest burden. The mountain wants you to remember so you can forgive." He looked again, and this time the image changed once more. He saw himself kneeling beside a grave in the snow, leaving his axe there as if making an offering. The vision faded slowly, leaving only the reflection of the lantern again. Elias stood there for a long time, breathing slowly, feeling something inside him begin to ease, not disappear, but soften. When he finally looked up, Nita was watching him with quiet understanding. "You have seen," she said. "Now you can rest." They walked back to the main part of the cave in silence. The fire was still burning softly, casting its golden glow on the walls. Elias sat down feeling drained but lighter somehow. Nita added another log to the fire and the flames rose again. After a long moment he said, "I think I understand now why you stayed here. This place doesn't just protect you, it listens." Nita nodded. "It listens to those who listen back." They sat quietly for a long time. The storm outside had long faded, and the moonlight spilled through the cave's entrance, painting the ground in silver light. Elias felt a deep calm settle over him. For the first time in years, his heart didn't ache with regret. He felt as though the mountain had forgiven him, or maybe taught him to forgive himself. As he watched the fire crackle softly, Nita whispered something in her native tongue. He didn't understand the words, but he felt their meaning: gratitude, peace, and belonging. The night stretched around them like a gentle blanket, and the mountain stood silent and watchful, guarding the two souls who had found each other by chance, yet perhaps by fate. And as sleep slowly took him, Elias thought he heard the faintest echo deep within the cave, a voice like the wind, whispering softly, almost kindly, as if saying, "You are home." The next morning was quiet, too quiet. The snow had stopped falling, but the air outside carried a strange stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Elias stood near the cave's entrance, watching the white world below. The trees looked heavy and still, their branches bending under the weight of snow. There was peace in the view, yet something in his chest felt uneasy, like the mountain was whispering a warning he couldn't quite hear. Behind him, Nita was gathering her few belongings. She moved slower than usual, as though she too sensed something different in the air. "The forest is not happy today," she said softly without looking up. "It listens when people come where they shouldn't." Elias turned toward her. "You mean strangers?" She nodded. "There are footsteps down in the valley. I heard them at dawn." He frowned, surprised. "I didn't hear a thing," she gave a small smile. "You still listen with your ears." "I listen with the ground." Her words made him quiet. He didn't doubt her. Not anymore. He had seen enough in this place to understand that the mountain told her things it didn't tell others. Elias took his axe and stepped outside to look around. The sunlight was pale but bright enough to see tracks in the snow. Not animal tracks, but boot prints, several of them. They led from the edge of the forest toward the slope near the cave. He followed them for a short distance, crouching to study the marks. They were fresh. Someone had been here not long ago, maybe an hour. The prints were wide and deep, made by heavy shoes. Men from the town, perhaps. He turned back quickly. When he re-entered the cave, Nita had already gathered her shawl and small bundle of herbs. She met his eyes calmly. "They are coming closer," she said simply. "They have fire and noise in their hearts." Elias set down his axe, uneasy. "If they're from the logging camp, they might just be looking for me. I told my foreman I'd be cutting near the ridge before the storm hit." She shook her head slowly. "No, these are not your people. They carry greed, not worry." Elias wanted to ask how she could know that. But before he could speak again, the sound of voices carried faintly through the wind, rough laughter echoing from below. His stomach tightened. She was right. They waited in silence as the sound grew louder. Soon 3 figures appeared through the trees, men in thick coats carrying tools and rifles slung over their shoulders. Elias recognized one of them, Henry Carr, a trader who sometimes bought lumber and animal pelts from the camps. He was known for his loud talk and rough temper. The men stopped a few feet from the cave, looking up. "Well, look what we found," Henry said, his breath steaming in the cold air. "A nice warm hole in the mountain. Didn't know anyone lived up here." Elias stepped forward, trying to stay calm.
"Henry, it's just me."
"Took shelter during the storm." Henry's eyes narrowed. "Yeah, but you're not alone, are you?" He tilted his head, peering past Elias. Behind him, Nita stood silently near the fire, her dark eyes fixed on the strangers. Her presence seemed to unsettle them. One of the men muttered something under his breath. "She's Apache," Henry said after a moment, his tone half sneer, half curiosity. "Didn't know there were any left up here." Elias felt anger rise but kept his voice even. "She lives here. This is her home. We're not bothering anyone." Henry stepped closer. "Her home, huh? These hills belong to the logging company now. We got a map that says this mountain's part of the new cutting zone. You tell your friend there she might want to move along." Nita said nothing. She only watched him, her face calm but her eyes sharp as glass. Elias spoke firmly. "Nobody's moving her anywhere." "You'll have to talk to me first." Henry laughed, a short, hard sound. "You're too soft, Boone, always were. Tell you what, we'll just look around a bit. Don't want any secrets hiding in these rocks." Elias stood in their way. "You're not going inside." The 2 men behind Henry shifted uneasily, sensing the tension. Henry stared at Elias for a long moment, then gave a slow shrug. "Fine, keep your cave. But don't come crying when the company sends its own men to mark trees. They don't ask before cutting." He turned away, signaling the others. As they walked off, one of them looked back, his face pale and uncertain. When they disappeared into the forest, the sound of their voices faded with the wind. Elias let out a long breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Nita moved closer to the fire, her expression unreadable. "They will come back," she said softly. "Men like that always do." He nodded grimly. "Then I'll stay until they don't." That night they kept the fire small and quiet. The cave felt tense, as though the mountain itself was uneasy. Outside, the trees creaked under the weight of snow. Elias couldn't sleep. He sat near the entrance, watching the moonlight spill across the frozen forest. Nita came to sit beside him after some time. "The mountain knows you mean well," she said softly. "But you cannot fight it with anger. It listens only to balance." He looked at her. "Then what should I do?" She thought for a moment. "Tomorrow we will go deeper. There is a place where the roots of the mountain touch the river below. It is old, older than memory. If you go there, you will understand what must be done." Elias wanted to question her, but her calm tone silenced him. He nodded slowly. "I'll follow your lead." The next morning they left early. The snow crunched softly under their boots as they walked through the forest, moving along narrow paths known only to her. The air was cold but clean, filled with the scent of pine and the faint song of distant birds. After an hour of walking, they reached a narrow crevice hidden behind thick brush. "This is the path," Nita said. Elias followed her inside. The way was steep and dark, but she moved with sure steps, her hand brushing the walls as if greeting an old friend. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber deep under the mountain. Light filtered through cracks in the ceiling, glowing faintly on stone walls covered with old drawings. Shapes of animals, people, rivers, and stars. Elias stared in awe. "Who made these?" "My people," Nita whispered. "They told stories here. This place remembers them." He walked closer, touching one of the carvings. It showed a figure holding a tree while another stood beside a river. The shapes were simple but full of meaning. "It looks like a promise," he said. Nita nodded. "Yes, the promise between the forest and the people who live with it. Take only what you need and the mountain will give back. Break that promise and it will close its heart." Elias understood. "That's what's happening now. The company cuts too much. The land can't breathe." She looked at him with calm certainty. "Then you know what you must do." Elias felt something awaken inside him, not anger but purpose. He realized that he couldn't just be a man with an axe anymore. He had to be the voice that reminded others of the promise. When they returned to the cave, the air felt lighter. The sun broke through the clouds, warming the snow outside. Elias stood at the entrance, looking out over the valley. The footprints of the men were already fading under the new snow, as if the mountain itself was erasing them. He turned to Nita, who stood quietly beside the fire. "I'll go back down soon," he said. "There are things I need to tell people. Things they've forgotten," she nodded. "Go and the mountain lets you. It will guide your words." That evening, they sat together in peace. The fire glowed softly, the air smelled of pine and earth, and for the first time in many years, Elias Boone felt that his life had a purpose greater than survival. Outside, the wind whispered across the mountains, carrying the promise forward, a promise between man and nature, between memory and hope, waiting for someone brave enough to keep it alive. The morning light came gently over the snow-covered valley. The sky was pale blue and a thin mist hung over the trees. Elias stood at the mouth of the cave, his breath forming soft clouds in the cold air. The storm had passed, the danger had gone, but his heart was full of quiet determination. The mountain around him seemed alive, listening, waiting. Behind him, Nita packed her small bundle of herbs in the clay pot she always carried. She moved with her usual calm grace, yet there was something different in her face that morning, a faint sadness mixed with peace. When she looked at Elias, her eyes were warm but steady. "The path you walk now is yours alone," she said softly. "The mountain has shown you its truth. You must carry it down below." Elias nodded, though he felt a weight in his chest. "I'll tell them what I saw," he said. "I'll tell them this place is alive. Maybe they'll listen." Nita gave a small smile. "Some will. Most will not. But the mountain only needs one voice to remember." Elias looked at her for a long time, unsure what to say. He had found this cave by chance, but it no longer felt like an accident. It felt like fate had guided him there, not only to find shelter but to find meaning. He looked around the cave one last time. The fire pit, the carved stones, the pool of water deep within. Everything here felt sacred, ancient. He turned toward Nita. "Will you be here when I come back?" She looked at him for a long moment. "If the mountain still needs me, I will. If not, I will become part of it." Her words were mysterious but gentle. Elias didn't ask more. He only reached down to gather his axe and his pack. The air felt colder as he stepped outside, but the light was growing stronger, spreading warmth across the snow. He began walking down the mountain path, following the same route he had taken days ago, but now everything felt different. The forest seemed to whisper as he passed. The trees swayed slightly, though there was no wind. Birds flew overhead, calling softly. He felt as if the mountain itself was guiding him safely down. It took him hours to reach the valley, and by the time he did, the world below felt louder, busier, less alive than the quiet peace he had left behind. When he reached the logging camp, the men were already at work. The sharp sound of axes hitting wood filled the air. Henry Carr stood near a wagon, giving orders. When he saw Elias, he raised an eyebrow. "Well, look who decided to come back. Thought the storm swallowed you up." Elias dropped his pack and walked closer. "Henry, you need to stop cutting near the North Ridge," Henry laughed. "What are you talking about?" "That's prime timber. The company wants that section cleared before spring." Elias stood firm. "That mountain isn't like the others. It's not just trees. There's life there, something old, something that remembers. If we keep cutting, the land will die." Henry rolled his eyes. "You've been out in the cold too long, Boone. The mountain doesn't care who cuts what. It's just wood and rock." Elias's voice grew stronger. "You're wrong. You didn't see what I saw. That place listens. It breathes. It gives back what we give it. If we destroy it, the valley will lose everything. The water, the soil, even the air." The other men had stopped working now. They watched quietly, their faces uncertain. Some of them respected Elias. He had worked among them for years and never spoke nonsense. Henry frowned, annoyed. "You think a few stories will stop the company?" Elias shook his head. "Not stories. The truth. You saw what happened last season. The floods, the landslides, the dry streams. The land is fighting back because we're taking too much. You can't keep cutting what keeps us alive." There was silence for a moment. One of the older men, named Jacob, stepped forward. "He's right," he said slowly. "My cabin was washed away in that flood. The river never rose like that before." Another man nodded. "And the ground's softer now. Trees fall easier. Maybe the land really is changing." Henry looked around, frustrated. You all losing your minds? But the others didn't laugh this time. The forest around them stood tall and quiet, as if listening. Elias took a deep breath and said, I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to go see for yourselves. Walk up there, feel it. If you listen closely, you'll understand. Henry hesitated. There was something in Elias's tone. Not anger, not fear, just truth. After a long pause, he muttered, Fine. We'll see this mountain of yours. They set out the next morning. Elias led the small group back up the ridge. As they climbed higher, the air grew colder, but the forest seemed strangely calm, as if it recognized him. When they reached the clearing near the cave, the men stopped, staring around in silence. The snow sparkled, untouched, and the trees stood like tall guardians around the entrance. Henry looked uneasy. It's quiet, he said. Too quiet. Elias nodded. Because it's listening. They entered the cave carefully. The fire pit was cold now, but the air still carried the scent of herbs. The walls shimmered faintly in the dim light. Elias led them to the inner chamber where the drawings covered the stone. The men stared in amazement. Who made these? One whispered. Elias answered softly. The people who lived here long before us. They made a promise to the land. Take only what you need and the mountain will protect you. Henry ran his hand over one of the carvings. His voice was quiet now. These are old. Real old, Elias nodded. Older than us. Older than any town. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Jacob said, Maybe we've forgotten too much. When they finally left the cave, the forest was silent again, but the air felt lighter. Henry looked thoughtful. Maybe we don't cut that section this season, he said at last. We'll tell the company the snow's too deep. Elias smiled faintly. That's a start. Over the next few weeks, the men kept their word. The north ridge remained untouched. The river ran clearer and the air felt softer, cleaner. Slowly, word spread among the camps that the mountain was special, that it was better left to itself. No one could explain why, but no one dared to test it either. Elias often returned to the ridge alone. Each time he climbed the familiar path, the forest seemed to greet him like an old friend. But one day when he reached the cave, Nita was gone. The fire pit was empty, her blanket folded neatly by the wall. Only the small wooden carving, the bird she had once spoken of, hung near the entrance, tied to a branch with a strip of leather. He stood there for a long time, staring at it. The cave was silent except for the faint sound of dripping water. Yet he didn't feel lonely. Somehow he knew she hadn't left. She had simply become part of the mountain she loved. Elias placed his hand on the cave wall. Thank you, he whispered. Then he walked outside, the snow crunching softly under his boots. The sky above was wide and blue, the wind gentle and kind. The forest below shimmered with life. Years passed, and the story of the mountain spread quietly from one village to another. People said the trees there grew taller and the streams never dried. Some claimed to see a faint figure standing by the cave at sunset, a woman wrapped in a brown shawl, watching over the valley. Elias grew older, but never left the forest. He became known as the man who spoke for the mountain, the one who reminded others of the promise, and every winter when the snow returned and the firelight glowed inside the cave, he would feel her presence near him, calm, silent, eternal. The mountain had kept its word, and so had he. And whenever the wind passed through the pines carrying the sound of distant song, it always seemed to whisper the same words, the mountain remembers.